So let's talk about then what is next in the Russia situation and the implications, right, for all of this that we are talking about. I want to bring in Timothy Fry. He's professor of post-Soviet foreign policy at Columbia. He's the author of Weak Strongman, The Limits of Power in Putin's Russia. Tim, thank you for being here this morning. And firstly, since your expertise is looking at the limits of Putin's power, we're seeing that play out in some ways into the Russian incursion into Ukraine. There's lots of reports about Russian soldiers either surrendering or the military just not being as strong as anticipated. What is your read of that and what it means for his leadership?
Great. So often Russian politics get reduced to Vladimir Putin's personality and occupational background, being in the KGB. But he governs a country of 11 time zones, and he has to balance the threat of a coup from his inner circle as well as the threat of mass mobilization. And the invasion of Ukraine has made both of those challenges so much more difficult. This was a decision that was taken by a single individual in consultation with maybe a half dozen members of his National Security Council. So there's very little elite buy-in. And the Russian public has always been skittish about conflict with Ukraine and is perfectly willing to recognize Ukrainian sovereignty. The public opinion is very clear on that question. So what we've seen is, a great deal of repression within Russia, both of the mass public and a real attempt to silence elite opinion. And that's a very difficult thing to do in a country with as diverse interests as Russia has.
Tim, if the West joins forces here, as was speculated over the weekend, to ban Russian oil, how might Putin respond to that?
Well, that would be a big hit on the Russian economy, but the Russian economy is already at the threat of seizing up. The sanctions on the central bank are really unprecedented, and they're much greater than I think anyone expected, certainly than Vladimir Putin expected. The politics of an oil embargo, broadly speaking, are difficult because of many countries rely on oil. There's an energy crisis. Prices are very high in Europe. So it's possible, but I think we should really focus on just the huge hammer of financial sanctions that have been put on the Russian economy that have already caused the currency to be, to go from 75 rubles to 140 rubles to the dollar. So these are really big impact sanctions.
So then how long can Putin keep this war going? I mean, it seems as though reportedly, for example, in his comments to Emmanuel Macron in France, he's determined to see this through, whatever that means in his eyes. Do you think
you should
that
always
he
be
will
careful.
Be able to?
Politicians often say things they don't really mean. So this could be, of course, just a bargaining ploy. He already has suffered, great costs at home over the execution of the war, which I think widely has been seen as bad. However, we also want to remember it's really difficult to overthrow an autocrat. All of the economic elites are looking around at each other and thinking, yes, things are really tough now, but if we go after the king and we miss, things are likely to be a lot worse. The information environment of Russia is really still controlled by the Russian state, even as lots of videos are getting through. And it's really unclear what direction the kind of battle of hearts and minds are going to go. When your country is involved in a war, patriotic elements within the country often rise up. So I think this invasion is really splitting Russian society between those who favor a view of fortress Russia versus those who want to bring Russia into the 21st century. And it's really unclear which side is going to win out.
Well, Tim, I know it's tough to say, but in your best estimation, how does this end?
I think that at some point, I think in a few weeks, there's going to be a ceasefire, which will be some opportunities for negotiation as the Russians try to resupply themselves. And they'll have to take stock of the great costs that Russia is facing. And one thing that Putin has always been very afraid of domestic instability. So I think the impact of these sanctions and all of the Western policy are less to try to get the economic elites to turn on Putin than just trying to make the country ungovernable. And at some point, that might be one way we could constrain Putin from pushing further into Ukraine and to try to find some negotiated agreement.
What would an agreement between Russia and Ukraine look like, you think?
It's very difficult to see right now. I think both sides, typically agreements come about after there's been a military stalemate, and then the countries are just forced to recognize the gains that have happened on the ground. Now, Russia's ability to occupy the country, given the incredible hostility of the Ukrainian population towards Russia, and again, that's something that didn't exist 10 years ago, would make a long-term occupation really difficult. So one solution might be, and just floating this, is Ukraine recognizes some independence for the two parts of the Eastern republics, perhaps recognizes Crimea, and then there's some negotiation about what kind of limits might there be on weapons placed in Ukraine. Now, this would be a very difficult political sell in Ukraine. Ukraine seems to be in no mood to negotiate. They feel like they can wear down the Russian government, and by inflicting costs, they can really make life uncomfortable for Putin. So the win set of agreements that would be acceptable in Kiev, Moscow, and the West is still very small.
Well, let's hope whatever happens, there is at least some kind of minimization of further bloodshed that's going on in Ukraine. Timothy, thank you so much for your perspective on this really interesting stuff. Timothy Fry is professor of post-Soviet foreign policy at Columbia University. Thank you.